Truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God.
Carrying a patibulum, a reassessment of non-Christian Latin sources. That is the term that you, fellow researcher, can type into your search engine and follow along if you so desire. But seriously, don't just take my word for it. Go read the research for yourself after this. Oh, and welcome to the channel. My name is Brandon, and this is Born Again XJW. Once you type that term into your search engine, you are looking for this particular link from Cambridge.org. The research article was published June 5th in the year of our Lord 2020, Volume 66, Issue 3 of New Testament Studies. So if all of that lines up, you have the correct article. Here is a summary of what you can expect to take away from this video. Romans are writing in Latin. In these writings, the patibulum, which is the smaller horizontal cross member of the crucifix, is mentioned, and the author of this research article, named Ruben van Wijngaarden, along with Gunnar Samuelson and John Granger Cook, are giving input as to how credible these writings/sources are to the practice of ancient cross-bearing. Here is the first text reference.
Historically, in Rome and Judea, there was a man by the name of Yeshua who was crucified. Oftentimes, particularly in religious art, we have this representation of Jesus of Nazareth carrying his own cross, the whole cross. Now, those pictures are historically incorrect. The crux, the cross, was never carried. What was carried as a form of punishment by those who were going to be crucified was the so-called patibulum. As one has a general survey of ancient Roman sources in Latin describing what a patibulum was and how it was carried and how it was linked to the practice of crucifixion, one will eventually come in contact with these 5 descriptions in Latin. These descriptions use the Latin term patibulum in combination with verbs of the semantic domain carry, bear. Patibulum ferat per urbem, deinde affigatur cruci. Let him carry the patibulum throughout the city. Let him thereafter be fastened to the cross. The overall mood of this text in Latin is subjunctive, and it expresses that a certain person should carry a patibulum throughout the city. Thereupon, he needs to be fixed on the crux. So the crux in this case is probably representing an upright pole, while the patibulum is something that the person who's going to be crucified is carrying. And then, probably, with the patibulum still on him, he was attached on a cross.
The writer of this text is commonly referred to only by his last name, Plautus. Here's a quick overview of this individual. His full name is Titus Massinius Plautus. He was a Roman playwright of the Old Latin period. He was born in Serena, Italy, and died in 184 BC. His comedies are the earliest Latin literary works to have survived in their entirety. This text appears in Plautus's charcoal play. Wijngaarden states that the text is subjunctive, in which the wish is expressed that a certain person should carry a patibulum through the city and then be fixed to the cross. It is of note that Samuelson disagrees and thinks that this is potentially 2 separate punishments. Samuelson notes that Plautus does not say that the patibulum was necessarily an intended part of the crux, that the patibulum was subsequently attached to the crux. The carrying of the patibulum might as well be a separate punishment. An example of a degrading act similar to that of carrying a furca. If this is the case, Plautus describes 2 punishments. First, a walk in disgrace which ended with the removal of the patibulum, perhaps then handed over to another victim of the humiliating walk. Second, Plautus relates the thereafter, some kind of attaching of the victim to a crux occurred. The above mentioned texts which contain patibulum do not contradict this reading. While this is true in the sense that Plautus does not have the characters say, and together with the patibulum, he is affixed to the crux, this is clearly implied. As we will see with Claudius Licinius fragments below, texts do not give all the information, but rely on intertextual frames. There is no reason to indicate that the patibulum was removed, at least at no point do we have evidence of that. It is, in my opinion, correctly referred to when speaking of cross-bearing in the classical sense. Now, just to break the fourth wall a bit, I'm addressing you, the viewer, quickly. For the sake of time, I'm just going to include the text in Latin, then the translation in English, and then on to the next text. If I include all the back and forth between Samuelson, Cook, and Wijngaarden, this video will simply be too long. So please do go and read the article for yourself. It is an incredible resource. And now we move on to the next text. This text is from Plautus's play The Braggart Soldier and is set in Athens and Ephesus. In this particular section of the play, one slave suspects the other of trickery, so they block the doorway with their body and they speak these words to the other slave.
Quid aesti, sceledre, hankrem gero, habeo auris, loquere quidivis, credo ego istoc exemplo tibi esse, pereundum extra portam, dispessis manibus patibulum quam habebis. What do you say, Sceledrus? I have this job. I have ears, speak what you will. You'll soon have to trudge out beyond the gate with outspread arms in that attitude. I take it, when you will have the patibulum. With this description, we understand that this patibulum most likely had a horizontal shape because it describes specifically the fact that the arms were stretched, outspread. O carnuficium cribrum, quod credo fore, itate forabunt, patibulatum per vias stimulis, carnufices, huc si reveniat senex. Oh, riddle the executioner. I guess it will be thus when the executioner will bore you with goads, patibulated, through the streets when the old man comes back here. This is an interesting one, but it kind of, again, reinforces this idea that the patibulum was attached somehow to the person who was going to be punished. Patibulated, it's kind of a rare event, but in this case does give that idea.
He meant to say rare expression, not rare event, and there is more information on that particular word, patibulated, in the research article.
Diligat ad patibulos, de ligantur et circumferuntur, cruci de figuntur. Fastened to a patibulum, they are fastened and led around and then nailed to the cross. Here we have the first mention that I could find when it comes to the method in which people were fastened, the nails, that the ancient Romans do speak about the nails even when referring to crucifixion in general.
I really suggest you look at this particular section of the research article, because you will quickly see that historians do not make fast and quick conclusions and declarations, but are careful to make decisive statements. Research the term historical method on your own, learn the difference between primary and secondary sources, and even how other types of evidence are categorized. I promise you it will help with your research in the future. The title for this video was called, How Did the Romans Describe the Crucifixion? A picture is worth 1,000 words, or in this case, graffiti. This next Roman said so much with a picture and a few short words, which leads me to introduce to you the Alexamenos Graffito. This is an ancient Roman graffiti that was scratched in plaster on the wall of a room near Palatine Hill in Rome, Italy. Currently housed in the Palatine Museum, it is said to be one of the earliest depictions of Jesus. It should be noted that it is difficult to date. However, current estimations is that it was etched around the year 200 AD. The image depicts a human-like figure affixed to a cross, so notice vertical beam, horizontal crossbeam, or a patibulum, and possessing the head of a donkey or a mule. In the top right of the image is what has been interpreted as either the Greek letter upsilon or a tau cross. To the left of the image is a young man, apparently intended to represent Alexamenos, as a Roman soldier or a guard, raising one hand in a gesture, possibly suggesting worship. Beneath the cross is a caption written in crude Greek, which basically translates to Alexamenos worships his god. Several other sources suggest Alexamenos worshipping a god or similar variants as the intended translation. In the next chamber, another inscription in a different hand reads, Alexamenos Fidelis, which is Latin for Alexamenos is faithful or Alexamenos the faithful. This may be a retort by an unknown party to the mockery of Alexamenos represented in Graffito. Now, what's interesting is I'm going to tell you exactly where this carving was found, but it was basically a boarding school for young men. So this totally lines up as being like a back and forth, like someone scratches a graffiti mocking Alexamenos for being a Christian, and then somebody else not in Greek, but in Latin writes Alexamenos the faithful. I just thought that was kind of interesting. The retort is back in Latin, but also showing that, Greek was sort of a common language at the time. So when he crudely etched the Alexamenos Graffito into the wall to slam Alexamenos, he was doing it in the common tongue, or I guess you could say the common written language at the time, which would have been Greek. And then somebody, probably another Christian, responded in Latin. Now, again, it should be of note, no clear consensus has been reached on when the image was made. Dates ranging from the late 1st century AD to the late 3rd century AD have been suggested, with the beginning of the 3rd century AD thought to be the most likely. As far as the discovery and location, the graffiti was discovered in 1857 when a building known as the Domus Gelotinia was unearthed on Palatine Hill. The Emperor Caligula had acquired the house for the imperial palace, which, after Caligula died, became used as a boarding school for imperial page boys. Later, the street along which the house sat was walled off to give support to extensions to the buildings above, and it thus remained sealed for centuries. The inscription is usually considered to be a mocking depiction of a Christian in the act of worship. The donkey's head and crucifixion would both have been considered insulting depictions by contemporary Roman society. Crucifixion continued to be used as a method of execution for the worst criminals until its abolition by the first Christian emperor Constantine in the 4th century. Let's actually take another look at a different graffiti. Hey, what you meant for evil, God used for good. So, this is called the Crucifixion Graffito of Alkimilla from Puteoli. Now, I know I'm going to butcher most, if not all, of these pronunciations, so bear with me. But the website reference is rogerpierce.com. If you simply want to look at different references, you can just type in the Crucifixion Graffito of Alkimilla, and you'll be able to find several articles that discuss it. But it says here, in 1959, a group of 8 tabernae were excavated at Puteoli. Okay, so tabernae was like a guest house. So tabernae 5 was a guest house, as is clear from the graffiti within it. These mention various names and cities. On the west wall of tabernae 5, a massive graffiti including the following graffito of a crucified woman. The cross is 40 centimeters high, the cross piece is 26 centimeters long, and the figure is 35 centimeters high. The graffiti belongs to the reign of Trajan or Hadrian. So when I put all of this stuff up on a timeline, guys, I just want you to understand that the practice of the patibulum was being discussed before Jesus, during his contemporary time, and then after. This is how the Romans understood it. This is how they depicted it. I feel like I can with 100% certainty say this is what the shape was. Like, I feel like it's over. So a name, Alkimilla, is inscribed over the left-hand side of the image, above the shoulder, suggesting that this is the name of the person in question. It is also possible that this is a form of curse text rather than a record of an actual event. The marks across the body are perhaps from flaying or whipping. So if you look at the image here, you can see, again, the horizontal crossbeam. I think that those are probably stripes supposed to be depicting flogging. And of course, you can see the person's feet are crossed at the bottom. Again, it's graffiti, guys. It's etched into plaster using a rock, so it's not going to be the best quality. But whoever etched this graffiti wanted this to happen to Alkimilla. It's basically like, again, a curse text or something. So what are we to make of all of this information? I hope you find it as fascinating as I do, because firstly, I want to address a few different concerns that I've had whenever I talk about the particular shape of the instrument of execution that happened to Jesus of Nazareth. For my Christians out there who are going to leave any variation of the comment, the shape is not important. I simply adopt the language of the Jehovah's Witnesses. You are absolutely correct in saying that. And here's what I mean. Yes, when having conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, you can just adopt their language and you can say torture stake or you can say tree, whichever you prefer, because that's not the thing to fight over. The atonement is the thing to speak to them about. So that is what's most important. So I hope it's not lost on anyone what is important. For me personally, I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I used to hate this symbol. When I would see this symbol, I would associate it with pagan worship. I would associate it with satanic imagery. It was a detestable thing to me. Now, when I look upon the cross of Christ, it is not a magic charm to me. It is a reminder of what was done on my behalf. So as a former Jehovah's Witness, the beauty of the cross, this thing I used to hate, means so much to me. And to be able to reach back into antiquity from different sources, in this case, specifically Roman sources, what did the Romans say they did? I don't care about carvings in a cave in India, or can you find a cross symbol in, New Mexico somewhere. I don't care about any of that stuff. I want to know, how did the Romans do it? And then from there, I can extrapolate, okay, what was the actual shape itself? So I think I think I demonstrated through the Roman sources, or through the Latin sources, I should say, that the shape that they had in mind when they would think of the term crucifixion was a lowercase t horizontal shape. Okay? Now, just to push back a little bit on why is this even an important subject? Again, most people wouldn't care, but let's take a little snippet from jw.org. So they have an article on here that's called "Did Jesus Die on a Cross?" And then at the very bottom, they're kind of trying to say the same thing I am. The shape isn't important. But here's where they go wrong. Point number 3, use of the cross in worship has a pagan origin. Hundreds of years after the death of Jesus, when the churches had deviated from his teachings, new church members were permitted largely to retain their pagan signs and symbols, including the cross. This is supposedly a accurately used quote from the Expanded Vines Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words. However, the Bible does not condone adopting pagan symbols to help make new converts. When I look at the Alexamenos Graffito, this is a Roman pagan who does not believe in the God of Christianity, and he is not looking at the cross as a symbol of Christianity or of paganism. He's looking at the cross as an insult, the insult it was meant to be. So he uses it in an anti-Christian way. So this whole point number 3 doesn't really make sense, that, the church had deviated from the teachings of Jesus, and because they just wanted to blend Christianity and paganity all together, they just started accepting, different symbols from different faiths. And that is absolutely not the case at all. It seems more the case that Christians were being persecuted wherever they went in antiquity, and that they were not commingling with the surrounding cultures with them, but they were always at odds with them. So it was this unblendable oil and water thing going on. But again, just to make it clear, when you wear that cross, when you hang one in your home, when you put one outside of your church, this is not a magic charm. This is not something that you can hold up in front of a vampire and they'll burst into flames. It doesn't work that way. This is a symbol. It's a reminder. In the same way that when Joshua was commanded by God to take the Ark of the Covenant and have the priests walk into the water, and then as soon as they walked into the water started coming down. It was at flood level all year long. And then they walked into the water with the Ark of the Covenant, and then the waters went down, and then they were each told to collect a rock from the bottom of that river that they were crossing. And then when they got to the other side of that river, when all the people had passed over into the promised land, Joshua was told to take those 12 stones that the priests had grabbed from the bottom of the river where the miracle happened, and they were to set up the stones. And every time people looked at the stones, or if a child looked at the stones and said, "Why are these stacked here? What does this mean?" people could tell the story of that particular miracle. And that's what the cross is. If anyone's curious about it, if they ask you about the cross around your neck, or if they say, "Oh, what a beautiful collection of crosses you have on your wall," or any part of it, you can be like, "Do you know what that means?" Here, let me tell you what that means, because it is a symbol, it is a reminder. And we as people are commanded to do that sometimes. You can find examples of it in the Hebrew scriptures of where God is asking them to stack stones as a reminder. So the cross to me is a modern day stacking of stones, and I hope it's that for you as well. I hope it's a symbol and a reminder of how much you are loved by God, and that this was always the plan before he even made the first atom of creation. This was always the plan, and he did it for you. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and God bless.
Truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God.